And we are here on the Nightmare Press podcast, episode 11. We're with Phil Brucato. He is a game designer, an author, a publisher, and a guy who does many things with a lot of creative output. So, how you doing there, Phil?
Oh, good. Well, Satyros, please. It's just Satyr. Satyr is fine.
Okay.
But yes, my professional name is Satyr Phil Brucato. Most people know me as Satyr. Phil Brucato is my birth name. I've never been particularly fond of it, so I've been going by Satyr for the last 25 years.
Well, that's what I'll call you then. So his name is Satyr. I know, I don't know. I've thought about going by different names too, just because I got sick of being called Pink Floyd, Floyd the Barber, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Jacob Marley. Mm-hmm. So and my middle name is Arthur. So that's even worse because you know what everybody calls me because of that. King Arthur.
Okay. So, hey, at least it's not Art the Clown. Or actually, I don't know. Art the Clown might be kind of cool.
Yeah. There's probably some people I'd like to go Art the Clown on, but you know,
I get that.
I won't. I won't get into that. I think we were just having this discussion on one of Coyote's posts yesterday. About I try not to write people into my stories that I'd like to kill. But you and Coyote both are encouraging me to do so, though.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of the most cathartic experiences that I had writing wise was taking a guy who had really screwed me over in real life and doing a sort of fictionalized version of him in my story Loopholes. And by the end of Loopholes, when he gets turned over to the fairy godfather, I rather enjoyed writing that. And then there was in Freak Legion, which was a werewolf book that I did with a werewolf in the 90s. There was I got the again cathartic experience of beating the shit out of my old boss. And puking worms, puking carnivorous worms on cops. It was fun.
Nice. Yeah, that's. I don't think there. I never met too many people that I really just wanted to beat the shit out of. Maybe a couple here and there, but until I got on Facebook and started dealing with certain writing communities, and now I have a whole list of people I'd love to just we'll whoop ass on, but I'm not going to talk about that because I try to leave all that in the past. But
hacksaws for everybody.
Hacksaws, chainsaws, bone saws, whatever. No, but hammers. No.
Hammers.
Running them over with cars. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Lawnmowers, yeah.
Carnivorous worms.
Carnivorous worms is always an option.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll refrain from any more brutality for now. So let's start off. You've been around for a long time, doing a lot of things. So
thank you. Yeah. Okay.
No, I was going to say let's just go ahead and just tell me what got you into it.
Okay. I've been telling stories and writing stuff since I was a little kid, but I have dyslexia, so I wasn't able to do it at a professional level until the late 1980s. In the meantime, I had done about 10 years, worked as an actor, and in fact, that's what my college degree is in theater. And so I did live theater, film, radio, audiobooks, and TV and stuff like that. But by the late 80s, after I graduated, I realized that I was not making enough money to pay back my student loans and support me and my then wife. So at that point, I worked a series of shitty jobs, as I think maybe not everyone, but most people do. And again, because of the dyslexia, I couldn't type. My handwriting is terrible. Even I can barely read it. And I can't spell for shit. So I was not, although I was able to write stuff during high school that was published, somebody else would have to transcribe it. Fortunately, my friends John and Lori in college hooked me up with the LAN system at the basement of the library in our college. And so I was able to proofread and then print out my work. And at that point, I started getting published in one of the local papers, one of the local literary magazines. Sold my first story to Marion Zimmer Bradley in 1990.
Oh, wow.
And that led to me getting a word processor, so I was able to do it at home. And when my friend and college roommate Bill Bridges started working at White Wolf in 1992, he got hired in 1992. I was like, remember me? I'm a professional writer by that point. I'd been writing professionally for 3 years, and so I got started on Werewolf as a freelancer, and the following year joined the staff as the mage developer. And for better and worse, have been associated with White Wolf for 33 years. So,
oh, wow.
I guess, 33 years.
Yeah, that'd be 33.
But after I left White Wolf in the late 90s, I started doing music journalism and formed the first of several companies, which was Laughing Pan Productions. We did Deliria Fairy Tales for New Millennium and Plunder, which was a pirate card game. I left that in 2005 because I'd gone bankrupt and didn't want to drag the company into court with me. And then I did freelancing for a while after that while I was working at Barnes & Noble, and then reconnected with the folks. At that point, White Wolf had been bought out, but I reconnected with Rich Thomas, who had been one of my coworkers at White Wolf when he formed Onyx Path in 2011 or 2012. We started talking about Mage 20th anniversary, and then I did that. And my last book, and I think the last book for the Mage 20 line, just came out last month. And in the meantime, I was also I ghost wrote some books for some doctors, wrote porn scripts at one point, which was funny, published a bunch of short stories, wrote for New Witch magazine and Witches and Pagans magazines for about 5 or 6 years. Basically, when people ask me, what do you write? I say, yes.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah. Worked on an indie TV series called Strowlers, wrote a few screenplays, wrote a few film treatments, none of which was produced, but I wrote them. Did a web comic for a few years called Arpeggio and turned that around into the novel Red Shoes, which came out about 2.5 years ago. And am working on the follow-up to Red Shoes now. And in the meantime, I've continued to pay the bills with game writing because that's been the most consistent source of income. I write the book, I get paid. I write the book, I get paid. So I don't have to shop them around, which you have to do with a lot of the other things. I didn't have to look for work in that field.
Yeah, I imagine the game thing is pretty popular, pretty steady source of income.
Yeah,
I know one of the biggest games you were known to be a part of was Mage: The Ascension.
Yeah.
What was your role in that?
Co-creating it, and managing it for 11 years, 12 years, something like that. Basically, so short version, long story. The way that White Wolf worked was the two founders of the company, Mark Reinhagen and Stuart Wick, would come up with an idea, and then they would have the staff basically turn that idea into a game, and then they would hire somebody to be the line developer. And at that point, the game was given entirely over to the line developer, who then, for at least the first few years, had complete carte blanche as to what they wanted to do with it. I was the line developer on Mage. They hired me after the original book was written, and as my manager, the Ken Cliff, the head of editing and developing, said, he hands me the first copy of the book to come back from the printer, and I said, how much creative freedom do I have with this? He said, as long as you don't change anything major with it, you can do whatever you want. We have no idea what to do with it. It's all yours. So wow. I did. I've written, I don't even know how many of the Mage books I've written completely, and I wrote at least part of every Mage book that has my name on it, which is over 100. But I was also writing on Werewolf, was co-creator on Vampire Dark Ages, Kindred of the East, and Wraith the Oblivion, and Changeling the Dreaming. I actually got my Satyr nickname from my work on Changeling the Dreaming. Ian Lemke, who was the line developer for that, was asking me, because I'd written a section of the Kiths for first edition of Changeling, and he said, how did you like it? I said, I really had a blast with that, especially related with the satyrs. They just felt like me. And he laughed. He says, that's because you are a satyr, Phil. And this became a running joke, and they would either Ian or me would like put pictures of satyrs up on my office door and stuff like that. So after I left White Wolf and I started working at Barnes and Noble, there was another guy named Phil, and they said, do you have a nickname? I said, yes, Satyr. And so at Barnes and Noble, everybody just knew me as Satyr, and that's what I've been going by for the last 25 years.
Yeah, I guess it works. I know there was one time I walked in someplace and somebody goes, "Whoa, that guy looks like a satyr." But the name never stuck. I don't know the guy, so I guess it didn't work. Of course, I was standing in McDonald's one time, and a guy in the drive-thru, I heard him go, "Whoa, that guy looks like Teen Wolf." So I thought that was. And I had longer hair than it was sticking out my hat. It's like just for the longest time, I wore the hat and I had the long hair, so I had the long hair. My beard was longer then too. And I thought that was pretty good. But there was another game I think you were a part of, if I'm not mistaken, Vampire the Masquerade. And you have something to do with that?
A little bit. I actually, of all the White Wolf books, that's the one I work. Of all the White Wolf lines, rather, that's the one I worked on least. As I said, I co-designed and wrote a good portion of the first edition of Vampire the Dark Ages. I wrote a little bit on a few other books. My main claim to fame in Vampire is why am I blanking? Revelations of the Dark Mother, which I wrote with my friend Rochelle Udall. And I'm really proud of the legacy for that. Well, that and Kindred of the East, I'm less proud of. But Revelations of the Dark Mother, I'm still very proud of that piece. No, at one point, actually, when Andrew Greenberg, who was the original Vampire the Masquerade developer, left the company, he had suggested me as his replacement, and Ken asked me if I wanted. I'm like, no, vampires aren't really my style. He says, oh, good, because we had no idea who was going to take over for you on Mage.
Yeah.
I like I said, I did a little bit of vampire, but vampires really aren't my thing. My things are werewolves, witches, and the Fae, and so that's what I've done the most of, not just with White Wolf, but with my career in general.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people who are drawn towards the wizards and the witches and all the magical creatures because I've just always had an obsession with Tolkien's universe.
Cool.
That's why I've never tried to write my fantasy stories, because I'm like, why? I would just be a derivative of Tolkien probably. But so tell us a little bit about Strollers.
Oh, Strollers? Okay, so again, short version, long story. So Ben Dobbins, who is the creator of Strollers, Ben Dobbins and I met when he was touring with the Gamers, the film The Gamers, and I was touring with Deliria Fairy Tales for New Millennium when we met at Gen Con in 2004. I loved the Gamers. He loved Deliria. We said, hey, we should do something together someday. So the next year, he said, if we were to do a Deliria movie, what would you want to be? And I pitched him an idea. And he's like, that would be awesome. And it kind of just sat there for a while. And then in 2007, he says, I've got somebody who's interested in doing, in producing a Deliria movie. Can you come out here to work on it with me? And I was like, yeah. So I borrowed some money for some friends, came out to Seattle, and I've been here ever since. Because that's where I met Sandy, my wife and my business partner and collaborator and favorite person on earth. And I came out here for what was supposed to be a few weeks business trip, and ended up that was almost 18 years ago.
You're still there.
I'm still there. I ain't leaving. But over the course of things, I wrote one of the film treatments I wrote a film treatment, and then I wrote a screenplay for Ben, and turned out they didn't actually have the money or the producer. We had a bit of a falling out. I took the screenplay back, changed the name. Again, things sat for a little while, and a few years later, Ben calls me and says, hey, would you like to work on this thing with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. So that thing was, he had taken a combination of what we'd been talking about with Deliria and another project that he'd been working on with the guy who had created the Gamers. And it was called Strollers. Strollers, I realize this is all complicated, but this is my life. Strollers is a word, is an archaic word, basically meaning a disreputable kind of just disreputable outlaw artist, creative, scary person. And our friend S.J. Tucker, who is an independent musician, Suge, That's S.J. Tucker Suge. Suge and I had met in 2004, and we became close friends. She actually introduced me to Sandy. Suge's partner, Kevin K. Wiley, had come up with the idea of using Strowlers as the name of a traveling festival. So they were using Strowlers as a festival. Ben wanted to adopt that idea into a TV series, and through various different creative alchemies, that ended up coming together around 2013. I think it was around 2013, 2000, might have been even 2012 when we started getting it all together. Because this is all like outlaw indie shit. It took fucking years for all the pieces to fall together. Yeah. The film was eventually made a few years later. It didn't do as well as we were hoping, but we did make it. And we also did some tie-in films with it, a tie-in book, and some other stuff. But basically, it is what it is. One of the things you learn, especially when you're in the arts, as you know, this Jacob, when you're in the arts for the long haul, there's a lot of stuff that comes together and a lot of stuff that doesn't, and a lot of stuff that comes together but doesn't really go anywhere. Strowlers was one of those things that did come together but didn't really go anywhere, which is a shame because it was actually very prescient about our current situation. Because there's this whole thing with an oppressive corporate government, taking out creative people and making outlaws of the creative people and so forth. And now we fast forward a few years and here we are.
I think we've all kind of knew it was going to happen sooner or later anyway.
Mm-hmm. It's not like it hasn't happened before in history, and if we ever have any future history, it'll happen again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's us artist types, creative types. We're masochists anyway. We stick at it. We stick at it even when it keeps not going anywhere, or when it comes together and doesn't go anywhere. And then I wonder if sometimes some people are like, "Yeah, I'm never going to go anywhere," and then something they do goes somewhere, and then they're like, "What the hell do I do with it now?"
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what if something really took off for me, I don't know what the hell I'd do. I'd be like, man, I didn't expect that to happen.
Well, this is one of the things I love about what y'all are doing with Nightmare Press. When I read, because I came across you online about a year or so ago, and I started following you, and I'm like, I really like what they're doing. Because, I mean, obviously, I am stubbornly indie, especially given my experiences with major IP holders. I've gotten more and more stubbornly indie, and I was like, hey, these folks look neat. And you're as far as I can tell so far, you treat authors well, which is a big plus.
I try to.
and you're doing the work, which I respect that, because that's the work is fucking hard. And I like that you're not staying limited in Nightmare Press to a small niche of, we're just going to do splatterpunk and let's see how many guts we can throw all over the screen. I love the eclectic attitude. I'm not going to say
anything. No, I appreciate that. That was when we began Nightmare Press. I wanted it to be more than just horror. It was an accident anyway. It was because there were people interested in Night of the Possums, right? There was a couple of agents interested. There was a mid-level press. There were smaller presses, but I just didn't want to do it. And I was like, you know what? I didn't like some of the other experiences I had. Some stuff. So then someone told me, they're like, hey, you got a different vision from a lot of other people in the horror community. Maybe you should try doing that. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then just a bunch of personal stuff happened, so we had to take some time off for a few years. But then when, you probably around the time you saw us sometime last year is when I was really trying to get it back going. But yeah, I've always wanted to move beyond just horror. And that's not anything against horror, because I like horror too, but I've never been a big horror reader. Like, I loved the movies when I was younger, but I don't really know, like, a lot of these authors that are popular, I didn't hear about until like 2018 when I started involving myself with the indie horror community. Like, I knew like Clive Barker, Stephen King, and R.L. Stein and Anne Rice. That was about it. So, yeah, so I appreciate when people tell me that, and I appreciate your words, because like when I see stuff like American Mystic, or when I would see stuff like Noir Fallen, which just I would always.
I've just been reading that myself. I just got Noir Fallen. I'm reading it now.
Yeah, I wanted more. You know, I wanted more for Nightmare Press than just that. I wanted to appeal to a community, a different community of readers and authors who are like, I really care about the book. I care about the work. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's what I wanted. So that's why people like yourself, because of course you have something with us coming out sometime soon. Hopefully,
Breaking
soon.
the Devil's Bread.
Breaking the Devil's Bread. Hopefully, sometime soon. I'm trying to get it caught up, but yeah. So that's I'm glad to have that. So again, let's talk about Breaking the Devil's Bread real quick, since we brought it up. Where did you get the ideas for this collection?
So the story, it's a collection of as I call it on the back, in the back cover text, 13 stories and an oops. And some of those stories, the combination of several of the stories in there are drawn from real life with a few names changed. And some of the stories very clearly aren't. The one about the serial killer collectors society is definitely not drawn from real life. Although the origin of that story is that I used to work with somebody who was a collector of serial killer memorabilia, which I thought was seriously fucked up. But the story came out of knowing this person and her husband. Yeah, I mean, this is a woman who collected serial killer memorabilia and idolized serial killers. I'm like, blink, blink, blink. You do know what they do to people like you, right?
That's a strange thing. That's actually a thing.
That's a thing, and that inspired the story. God, why am I blanking on the name of it now? It's my story. But in any case, that inspired that story. Some of the stories in there, Spooky shouldn't play with sharp things. That actually happened. That's just that was my experiences at a haunt where I actually was when I was accidentally stabbed by one of my coworkers.
Wow.
There's the Lingering Fist, which is about back when I lived in a shitty neighborhood and we had shitty neighbors, and one of them in particular lived upstairs, and that story is about our experiences with him. There's also the Green Tunnel, which has been previously published in a few anthologies, but it's one of my favorite stories, which is inspired by a hike that I did with, actually two hikes that I did with friends, but one in particular on the Appalachian Trail, which is called by the people who hike it the Green Tunnel. And some of the stories, the title story, Breaking the Devil's Bread, is a revision of a story that I had written years ago that was inspired by the Songs of Maldoror by the Comte de Latremont, which is a decadent novel from the novella from the 1800s, which was basically embracing the kind of the libertine, not even amoral, but deliberately immoral form of enlightenment. And this is a story about a guy who does that and gets caught by the inquisitors, and they torture him and stuff. And then they give him the parchment and ink and say, "Write your confession." He's like, "Fuck you. Here's what I'm going to write instead." And that's Breaking the Devil's Bread, because that's a phrase that I use in there, that fear is the devil's bread. And So the variety of stories in there. There's also The Lord's Greatest Jest, which is came from an anthology that I worked on called Where Thy Dark Eye Glances, which is queering Edgar Allan Poe, and it's retelling Hop Frog from perspective of two gay lovers. And so it's a variety of dark stuff, including an essay in there that is less of a story than an essay, but which is kind of a reflection of all of which has gone before, which is about predation and the place of predation in nature. So all in all, it's a lot of reflections on the darkness of our real world as focused through fiction.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting collection of stories, that's for sure. What I've read of it, obviously I enjoyed it, so I think it will be a good addition to Nightmare Press, and I look forward to getting it out eventually. So I want to go back to, you said you did some acting. I know that was only a brief time, but did you take anything you learned from the acting and apply it to more of your creativity?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I write like an actor.
Okay.
I was trained as a method actor in college. I began acting in high school. I was at that time, as I'm apparently on the autistic spectrum, although it's something I didn't even know about for decades. But I knew I was heavily dyslexic, so I had problems with school and real problems with fitting in with people because I could not understand what the fuck people wanted from me. When I got involved with the drama department in ninth grade, because I wanted to work on movies, so I figured, let me try and be an actor. I learned, I acquired a toolkit, which to interact with people, to kind of build a persona and learn personal skills and social skills and create this persona that was charismatic in a way that I didn't feel that I was in real life. And eventually that became my real life by the time I went into school into high school as an introvert, with a handful of friends and no idea how to deal with people at all, constantly assailed by sensory overload. I graduated popular with a bunch of friends, involved with a whole bunch of things, for radio station, the literary magazine, school paper, yearbook committee, had done lead and a bunch of stuff, and had begun doing acting in local community theater as well. And I said, okay, well, one of my friends, Stephanie, who also convinced me to stick with the writing, she convinced me to go to college, which I was not originally going to do because I had a lot of problems with school. She's like, college is different. So when I got to the idea of applying for college, I said I could either go and pursue an English degree, which would mean I would spend my nose buried in books for 4 years and maybe be able to teach afterward, or I could pursue a theater degree where I would get to do a bunch of shit I wouldn't get to do anywhere else, learn a bunch of skills I wouldn't learn anywhere else, and have no idea what the hell I was going to do after I graduated. So I did that.
I can definitely relate to struggles with school. I didn't do well in school at all because I had a lot of those same issues, and so you have to kind of like find your outlet, and I think that's good. Mm-hmm. You found that through theater and acting. So I would think acting, having the knowledge of acting and putting yourself into a character's mindset, probably really helps you as a writer with character development, I would imagine. Have you found like that's really a plus to help you? Like if you get stuck on a character, like what can this person do? So you can just kind of put yourself in there. Yeah.
Well, I refined from the method acting classes that I had in college. I refined what I call the 4 questions approach, which is, question 1, motivation. What do I need? Question 2, which is obstacles. What stands in the way of what I need? Question 3, tactics. How will I get what I need? Question 4, resolution. What happens when I do or do not get what I need? Whenever I'm writing, I'm working both from the characters' perspectives, not just the main character, but all of the characters' perspectives, because I write organically. I very, very seldom outline. But I say, okay, what does this character need? What does this character need? What does this character need? Okay, they get together in this space, in this room. Their needs are conflicting. They are the obstacles to one another's needs. How are they going to work that out? And that's how I write. I keep asking, what do they need? What do they need? What's in their way? What do they need? Also, on a meta level, as a writer, I'm asking, what am I trying to say with this story? What am I trying to say? If it's not a story, if it's a nonfiction piece, what am I saying? Why am I saying it? Who am I saying it to? How am I going to get what is going to be the thing that gets my point across best? And that's so again from both a character level. I tend to write in the first person. From a character level, I'm looking at it from a method acting standpoint, and on a meta level, as a writer, I'm looking at it from a what am I, the writer, trying to do? Because also as an actor, I learned to read the audience, and what am I? Well, I personally view, and I say this not only as an artist, but as somebody who's taught art, that art is a communication between the artist and the audience. The artist says, I feel this, and the audience says, I feel it too. And that's that sweet spot in there, is where what the artist is saying connects with what the audience needs to hear or wants to hear or was hoping somebody would say, because they feel it too. So when I, as a writer, am speaking to my audience, I'm trying to figure out who is my audience and what's the best way to get this across so that they feel what I feel.
Yeah, that's a very, very good outlook. You said something too on there, and you said you write organically. You didn't call it pantsing, and and I hate that term, pantsing.
Yeah,
because I'm just like, it's just, I get what people are saying, like, because I understand, because I do both. It just depends on what I'm writing. Like, I take a little bit. Some things I've mapped out really well, like Night of the Possums. I mapped out really well because there was something that had to happen in specific orders and do this and that. But other things, like what the book I'm getting ready to release, Hearts in the Hourglass, no map whatsoever. I just made up a bunch of stuff going on there, but it started out being a joke, but ended up being like really personal. So it was kind of like, I get it, but I just like the phrase "write organically" better than pantsing. Pantsing just sounds like, I don't know. But so I have to ask this question, because I ask it of almost every writer who comes on here, because you're talking about, and I'm going to try to combine these two. So for a while, I spent a time in a writing community online that was very much like, okay, so they wanted to push the idea of you're not what you write so hard. And of course, you're not always what you write, of course. But they pushed the idea so hard, and they were just so much like, you should try to write outside of what you know. You should try to write layers. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but they were very much against the idea of just you writing what you know and not ever trying to expand. I kind of don't agree with that. I think it's good if you learn new things along the way, and you should try to learn new things, but I think you need to stick to what you know when you write, because there's a lot of times where you can tell someone just wants to write about something and they studied it briefly through Wikipedia or online, and you can tell it just reads like, this is everything I read about it, so I'm just sticking it in here. It reads like a manual. So what do you feel? I think, again, when it comes to that question, write what you know versus learning new things kind of idea.
Well, again, I personally tend to base a lot of my writing in my real life experience. But one of the reasons I've enjoyed and I enjoy both writing and acting is because I have to constantly reach outside my comfort zone. Again, one of my primary motivations of pursuing that theater degree was to have experiences that I wouldn't have had anywhere else, and because I use the method acting approach, a big part of there's a profound misunderstanding about method acting, which comes from a lot of bad stereotypes, which is you become the character. As my acting teacher said, if you become the character, you're psychotic, and I don't want to be on a stage with you because you're dangerous. But what method acting is actually about is about constructing a toolkit so that you can bring real emotional reality and hopefully touch the emotional reality of your audience from in a deliberately artificial circumstance. And in order to do that, you research stuff. Folks who can't see this, can't see that I have like a library behind me, but I have a library behind me. And that library extends all the way through our fucking house, although that's both me and my wife. But in any case, I am a voracious learner. I'm always wanting to not only learn new stuff that I didn't know before, but also learn why people do the things they do. And so in terms of writing what you know, I base a lot of the things on my experiences and things I know, but I'm always trying to know more so that I can write about more. I think the idea that the writer or the artist is distinct from their work is erroneous, but the idea that the work is always an extension of the artist is also erroneous. It's both. And people taking those ideas to either extreme is not only toxic, especially in the social media a social media venue, but it's also factually incorrect and displays a profound misunderstanding of how the process works. That being said, I am not all artists, and every artist works differently. That's what works for me.
I think you're right. You said a lot of things, and I totally agree with me. It's like the experience is what matters. You can't always just read something you want to write about. You have to experience a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it has to be organic. You can't force it. So kind of like, and what you said about artists are different. I think that's a big thing people I dealt with struggled to understand. It's like when I would make very similar points to what you were making about it being both and everything. Of course, I would just get attacked and called all kinds of names and all kinds of stuff, but whatever. And then I'd fire back, and then they cherry pick my screenshots and show them that I'd be this bad guy, but whatever.
Yeah, my experience with writers communities, quote unquote, especially online, but not exclusively online. It's a bunch. My experience, again, I'm not saying this to everybody, but my experience and observation of them has been that it's a whole bunch of people who want but are not actually doing the work, who think they know everything about how it should be done. And they spend more time fighting with each other about how they think it should be done than they spend actually doing the work.
I agree, and I think
the writer has to do the work. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. No, you're right. I agree, and even it's like some of the people who would didn't agree with me, like they put out books occasionally, right? But it's like it's almost like they were always putting out the same books, and then you'd have like the people who didn't say much stuff like that. They were the ones who were constantly putting out something different, something good, something right. So it's like I feel like you said, a lot of people just want to talk about what they know with writing online without actually having done much. And whereas the people who actually were doing a lot, they weren't talking about it constantly.
Yeah, there was a writer community I got involved with extraordinarily briefly when I was still in Atlanta. I'm pretty sure it was Atlanta. In any case, we're in this room, and there's like a few dozen people, and they're all, and the presenter is like, so introduce yourself and say what you've done, and everybody is like, I'm so and so, I want to write this, I'm so and so, I've published a poem here or there, I'm so and so, and I want to be a writer, I have this idea and stuff like that. It comes to me, and so I've been writing professionally since 1989, and I've published several hundred things, and everybody just glares at me. And nobody said a fucking word to me for the rest of the night. And I suspect that there was probably, hello, Marigold. I suspect there was probably some, oh shit, this is somebody who actually does the thing.
What's he doing here?
Yeah, it was that was I was trying to find community, and what I found was that the people who, and I'm not bashing on people who haven't done all that stuff.
No, of course not.
Somewhere, and thinking about, I got into a big argument years and years ago with some folks online because somebody had said, well, what do you think? What do you think a writer? What do you think it takes for you to be considered a writer? And somebody said, oh, you're a writer if you think you are. I said, no, you need to do the work.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be published. You don't have to be paid. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to have a shelf full of books behind you or anything like that. But you need to write. And I got fucking dogpiled. I got dogpiled so badly that I just quit the group because I was like, no, you have to actually write. And people are like, you're being ableist. I'm like, dude, I'm dyslexic.
I'm being ableist. Being ableist because you actually have to write. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like
you're being ableist about somebody who can't do a thing. I'm like, I am dyslexic. I have been poor most of my life, and I began my professional career while I had 2 jobs. Don't talk to me about ableist. Do the fucking work. Are you kidding? Yeah. And people are like, oh well, somebody should be able to think. I said, nobody says that about a plumber.
No. Okay. I've always wanted to be a musician. So I feel like I must be a musician now because I want to be one.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
You see these guitars back here.
Yeah.
I haven't been doing much with these guitars lately, but I have those guitars back there because I've been in fucking bands because I learned how to play the fucking guitar.
I've tried to learn the guitar when I was a teenager and it didn't work out. And you know why? Because I'm not a fucking musician. All right. So that's, I wanted to be. In my mind, I thought I could be, but you know what? They didn't make me one, obviously, because I failed at learning the guitar. So you know what? I just kept writing poetry because I was decent at that. People liked it. So then I started writing other shit. So that's kind of how it goes,
Yeah.
So, yeah. You said something earlier about writing, writing people interpreting, what you write. Like when you write something and that has an effect on the audience. Do you ever feel like something you've written, maybe when you wrote it, you didn't mean it that way, but then like other people interpret it that way, and you think,
constantly.
You're like, damn, that's a good interpretation.
Yeah, or a bad interpretation.
Yeah. But writing, I think, is definitely interpretive. I think people sometimes are writing in themes and meanings that they didn't realize they were writing in. I know I do it.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that I'm the only one. I'm sure not everybody does it. But what do you feel about that? You think you've ever done that?
Oh, yeah. I've done it a lot. Well, and one of the things, and, our mutual friend Coyote, that's an example. When I first started with Mage, role-playing games were disposable media. Nobody expected that anybody would be reading. Basically, role-playing games were almost like comic books at that point, where the thing would come out, and then like 2 months later, you'd need to put out another source book because the previous source book was now out of print because not that many people would buy. So when we were writing this stuff back in the 90s, we didn't figure that people would be considering it gospel 30 years later. And one of the things that I learned after I left White Wolf, I was seeing a little bit of it while I was at White Wolf, but especially after I left White Wolf, I started running into people completely outside of the gaming sphere who were like, wow, Vampire changed my life. Mage changed my life. Like the first time I went to Burning Man in 1995, a guy walked through our campsite with a Wraith t-shirt on. And Wraith had only come out a few months earlier. Like, wow, okay. And it's like, this isn't, realizing that the stuff that we were writing was having that kind of influence on people for good and not always good. There's also that bunch of fucking vampire murder. Well, from I think it was rural Kentucky, but they thought they were vampires, so they killed a bunch of people.
Rod Farrell and his gang.
Stomped puppies. I'm like, man, I hope your cellmate stomped you too. But
you can't blame yourself for that, though. They would have found some other reason to be psychotic if that didn't exist.
Exactly.
That's just how it is.
But it's one of the things I learned from people like Coyote, was how much there were people who were reading our stuff 25, 30 years ago and it changed their lives. And so when I came back to Mage for the Mage 20 series, I was viewing what we were doing with a lot more gravitas and a lot more seriousness than when we were writing those books back in the 90s as fast as we could, because we had to keep producing. That was the only way we could stay in business. And you couldn't think too much. It was a Zen flow thing, because you didn't have time to sit back and contemplate what you're doing. You just had to produce. When we returned to Mage, I was able to not only think more seriously and approach it more seriously, but I also had more life experience, which also came into the work as well. So yes, I recognize that there are a lot of things that I've written, even when I haven't intended it to, have changed people's lives, usually for the better, occasionally, maybe not so much. But I am to that end, I am more careful about how I write things now, because I have realized that if you when you and I've told I've told Coyote this a few times. So when you do something extraordinary, no matter what it is, no matter how well you do or do not do it, there are going to be the people who worship you for doing it and the people who throw shit at you for doing it. And the trick of doing it long term is to make sure the first group doesn't go to your head and the second group isn't right. And after that, you do what you're doing because you're doing it and they're not. And just make sure you do what you're doing as well as you can.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And Coyote, speaking of him, he has called you the godfather of magical realism several times. And, you influenced a hell of a writer, too. He's very talented.
He's so good. Oh, my God.
He really is. Good. His ideas are great, and his writing is really good.
Yeah. He's so fucking good. He also, and he helped me out at a really bad time in my life. He started writing where the way he and I met each other was that he was on a mage Facebook community that I'm part of, and I had just gone through a really, really hard time. A bunch of people in my life had died. I was having problems with the publisher. Trump was ascendant. And there was just a lot of stuff that had really gotten me down. And then there's this kid writing these hilarious little sketches about working class technocrats. And you're just like, in Mage, the technocracy is this big, bad, evil, scary thing.
Yeah.
And he's writing about the day-to-day lives of these people who, basically doing their job, and they hate their job, and they kind of hate each other, but that's what they have to do. And he's funny.
Yeah.
And it's really good. And I'm like, damn, dude, you're good at this.
And he's really smart too. Like
he's really smart.
I've told him before, and I've told other people, I'm like, this guy should be famous. Like,
yes, he absolutely should.
He's exceptional. He really is. So
thank you for taking him on, because I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing with him, because I think he has the potential to be great. I mean, like
absolutely
Stephen King, Clive Barker level.
Oh yeah, easily. And he's definitely got that talent.
Yeah.
And that would be awesome if we could play a hand in getting him there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know that we'll ever get that high. But
we'll see. We're working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it, and I'm definitely. I tell everybody I'm on this ship till it either sails to the top or it goes down hard.
Thank you for doing
as far as magical realism goes, who, I guess, would you call yourself your work magical realism, and who would you say were some of your favorite magical realists?
It kind of is. I love Coyote dearly. I think he's giving me too much credit for being like the father of American magical realism, because there were people who were doing this before I was. But I definitely consider what I'm doing at this point to be magical realism. A lot of the writers who influenced me and to continue to influence me along that line are Alice Hoffman, Francesca Lea Block, huge influence, Francesca Lea Block. Michael Chabon, who's not really a magical realist, but I fucking love his work.
Yeah.
Stephen King to a degree.
He has some really good stuff along those lines.
He's got some amazing. King, people who think of King as a horror writer are missing like half of his corpus.
I think more than half.
He's been writing out. Yeah, more than half. He's been writing outside of the horror genre since before anybody even knew who he was.
Yeah.
And you see stuff like Lissy's Story or Revival or Fairy Tale, and that's not horror.
No.
It's amazing. Elevation, Mr. Mercedes. That's not the stuff people think of when they think of Stephen King. Honestly, I think it's his best work. But in any case, but the majority of the people who've influenced me, mostly female writers. I don't tend to write dude. In fact, I don't tend to think of myself as dude, but that's a whole other subject. But my biggest influence is Shauna McGuire. Not a magical realist, although her Wayward Children's series kind of qualifies. But largely Alice Hoffman, Francesca Lea Block would be my biggest influences in that regard. Isabella Allende, probably horribly mismangled her pronunciation. Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah, Stephen Graham Jones. Yeah, he's a big one right now.
Yeah. Oh God, he's good. Man, he's good.
I think James Wadgen, the guy who wrote The Vermin Sleep for Us, I think he got a mention or retweet or something from Stephen Graham Jones, and I was like,
sweet.
I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Good job.
I just read The Vermin. I just read The Vermin last week.
Yeah, it was.
Good stuff.
He's a real hard-working author. I've wanted to get him on the show to talk about the importance of authors being involved, especially on the indie level. And that's not just me being an asshole. I mean, like, I learned that experience myself, and it is very important. But he's a busy dude, so he does movies and he's constantly writing, pushing his books.
Cool.
So I know you said we were talking about community, and like you said, you were looking for a community online. I found that I came to the realization over a year ago that you can't really put yourself into a community. You got to find a community, and let the community find you. And I realized that, I was trying to help a lot of other people, and I've been doing that for years. At the same time, I had that group or whatever. And at the same time, I had Nightmare Press building. And then one day I just realized there's a group over here really isn't working out. And I don't have time to spend on it. But there's all kinds of people interested in Nightmare Press. And I was like, well, shit, dumbass, there's my community. So it's kind of like, I think you gotta either your community finds you eventually, or you stumble into it and So have you found like a pretty good community within yourself by, within your own circles?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it kind of just happens, right?
Well, it's funny. The majority of the community that I've had, because I've been part of a lot of, and am part of a lot of communities, but the majority of that has really been music. It's one of the reasons why music is such a part of my work, is because I love music. Music is probably my favorite thing.
Same here.
I'm fascinated by music, the cultures surrounding music, the people who make music, and although I'm not nearly as good at it as I wish I was, that's still been a big part of the communities that I've been I've been and continue to be involved with, as either musicians or musical subcultures. Goth, Celtic folk, Fey punk, punk rock, hardcore. I was big in the hardcore scene. Metal. I've been a metalhead since the late 70s. But at the same time, I don't define myself by those communities. I found most of my life. I'm wearing my Venom shirt right now. Talk about metal.
I got a rabbit shirt on because I have a rabbit.
Cool. Bunny metal.
The rabbits. I'm the rabbit guy. So, but
yeah, it's community. Keeping your eyes open, keeping your heart open for like-minded people, kindred spirits, helps build community, and also helps you realize when a particular community isn't for you.
Yeah, I know. It's can't force it. It's kind of like what the theme of our conversation here has been organic. So that's kind of like everything's organic. Yeah, and exactly. I think that's, honestly, like I've often called myself an amateur music historian, because I've often, like, when I get into something, I get obsessed with it. I get fixated on it. So when I fell in love with the Beatles when I was a teenager, rabbit hole. I was obsessed with everything music, rock music. And I've found that, like, even though I don't hardly remember half of what I used to know about it, but you and I have had some conversations about music on there. And particularly, we've talked a little bit about rock and roll and Rosetta Tharpe, how important she was. But as I've found that actually a lot of lyricists and songwriters have influenced my writing probably more than other authors have. Do you find yourself influenced by a lot of, like, songwriters, lyricists, and such?
Oh yeah. Well, Arpeggio, the webcomic that became Red Shoes, also became Power Chords, Music Magic and Urban Fantasy, Black Swan Blues, which I'm working on now. All of that stuff came from my friendship with Suge. And a conversation she and I had like 20 years ago or something now, but we were talking about what it was like for us in high school. And this character, Megan Susan Green, is like a fusion of teenage Suge and teenage me, except teenage me as seen from, middle-aged me. And it's funny because some people have talk about people thinking the wrong thing. They're like, oh, that's your lust object. I'm like, no, I am Megan. But Megan originated as a fusion of me and Suge. Suge's work influences me a lot. I'm always listening to music when I'm working. All kinds, but I'm always listening to music. Patti Smith has been a huge influence. Both her prose, her poetry, and her music are all huge influences on me. Jim Morrison, I was a Doors fan since I was a kid, and Killing Joke. Jazz Coleman, Prophet of the Apocalypse, huge influence on my work. Faith and the Muse, which were a goth band back in the 90s. In any case, yes, music is a huge influence on my work.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, because we're getting low on time, I wanted to ask you real quick about your time at Barnes and Noble. And mainly, I want your opinion. Do you feel like, all right, so it used to be like, I think they were more indie author friendly at one point, and I feel like they got away from that. What do you feel?
Yeah. Well, it's when I started working for them in late 99, early 2000. And at that point, the manager who hired me was really very good. And he had an extraordinarily knowledgeable and competent and enthusiastic staff. He treated us well. We all got paid well. Barnes and Noble basically had a very generous both discount policy and borrowing policy. You could borrow. They wanted people to know what they were selling. They wanted people who were enthusiastic about books, because not only because you could help people out more, but because you could upsell. I could upsell like a motherfucker. Somebody would come in looking for one book and they'd leave with 5 because I was selling something I loved. And that was rewarded when I first started working for them, and that went completely to shit around 2004, 2005. My manager in 2004, because I transferred to another store, she and we didn't get along for a variety of reasons. I mean, I was still periodics lead, so I still, had a decent, still had decent respect there. But when I transferred to another outlet in 2000, late 2004, that place was a fucking shithole, and I loved my coworkers, but by that point, the original founder of Barnes & Noble had retired, and the people who took over for him were just looking at how much more they could make every quarter. And they were also looking at the fact that Amazon was starting to eat up their market share, and they just started basically flogging the galley slaves harder while cutting back on the gruel. They froze our pay, they cut our benefits. They every week was another pile of busy work while they were cutting the staff doing the busy work. And finally literally killed a coworker of mine. And I went to them at that point, went to my district manager, who I'd known, for years. And I said, we need to get our health care back, because this guy died from a lack of health care. And she said, well, money's tight. I said, this is where we can save money. If we change this, we can save money here, so we can put money here. And she's like, you're right. Because at that point, I'd been working with the company for 5 years at 3 different locations. I'd been lower management, and I knew the way everything worked. Plus, I had worked in publishing. So she's like, you're right. She went to publishing, or rather, she went to corporate. She came back and said, they like things the way they are. If you're unhappy here, I suggest you find another job. I took the hint and I quit, but I quit, training my replacements and all of that. And I figured, we're still on good terms. And then about a year and a half later, I tried to get and when I came to Seattle, I tried to get a job there, and I found out that corporate had fucked me over and said that I had walked off the job and that I was a troublemaker. Like, well, fuck all y'all.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And that was, but it was my experience that when I started Barnes and Noble, I mean, indie friendly is questionable, because Barnes and Noble got where they are, as did Borders, by driving indie bookstores out of business. Mm-hmm. But they, for a while, were still very interested in customer service, and they were interested in people who were motivated and knowledgeable and loved books, because that made more money for them. Yeah. But that all went out the window when the original founder left, and the profiteers came in, and all they were interested in was making more money, even though they didn't even realize how their business worked.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's like you would make more money if you acted like you gave more of a shit about the product and the people that you have. People don't get that. They don't realize that.
They don't.
Happier employees creates more revenue, and more knowledgeable employees creates more revenue.
Yeah.
You got to give a shit about your product. If you don't, get the fuck out of business,
Yep, that's exactly it. And I guess I'm sure that's probably what led you and Jenny to forming Nightmare Press, and it's what led Sandy and me to forming Laughing Pan not Laughing Pan. Yikes, that's my old company, Quiet Thunder Productions.
Yeah.
But also led me to form Laughing Pan Productions in 2000 was because we looked at the way people we worked with did business. And we said, but you're doing it wrong. You're doing it badly.
Yeah.
If you did it like this, you'd actually be more successful. We're not at their level yet, but we're also not fucking our people over to get more money for us.
Yeah. Well, I feel like if I had the resources, I could be pretty far along, but that is what it is, right? So I'm just going to keep plowing ahead. So, but
yeah, I've read a number of your books. I'm reading more, and I like everything you've done. I really love what you all are doing with Nightmare Press. I think you've got a hell of a model here. I think you've got some really good people working with you, and I like you personally. So I'm glad you're doing it, because there's a whole lot of people who aren't.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, and we're out of time now. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And yeah, well, Breaking the Devil's Bread. Hopefully it'll be out soon.
Take care, y'all. Have a good one. Thank you.